Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Sauber, and today I'm going to be talking about beyond the basics, what GitHub can do today. So I'm going to show a bunch of things that people might not realize GitHub can do, but actually can do. So a little bit about me. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm also the Director of Engineering at Lean Techniques. We're a software consulting company and a GitHub partner. So the whole point of this talk is to basically be a series of lightning talks. And kind of the value add of it being a series of lightning talks is I basically have to condense all of this information down in a couple minutes on each one of these topics. So hopefully you get the most value out of this because I'm just focusing on the meat of things versus extending this out into like an hour-long conversation. So we'll talk about all these different things, but it's kind of grouped into two buckets: GitHub code collaboration and then GitHub actions and agents. So we'll go into a few different things from those two different sections. So let's go ahead and get into it and talk about some code collaboration tips. So let's first talk about VSCode.dev. So if you come out to any GitHub repository out here, and let's say I want to make a change to the README, I just want to do something simple. Well, I could come out here and click on the link and click edit in case I don't want to like pull it down and change things and whatnot. But you can actually just come out here and hit period on your keyboard. And basically what that will do is it'll redirect you to vscode.dev/GitHub and then basically your org name and repo name. It's going to ask, hey, do you want to log in? I'll go ahead and say I want to log in. And then it will basically give me a VS Code like experience here right in the browser, since VS Code is based on web technologies. So then I can come over here to my README, make my changes. I get better syntax highlighting. I get extension support, all of those kinds of things, and be able to make my change in a VS Code environment. So I don't use this all the time. Obviously, most of the time I'm running locally, but this is nice if I want to make some quick changes, or I don't want to clone down a repo, or maybe I'm on my phone doing things, whatever the case is. VSCode.dev is a cool way of doing that. Again, just hit period on whatever repo that you're in. All right, that is the first tip. The next tip is what I'm calling optimal GitHub settings. And really, optimal is just a synonym for my opinions. So I'll talk about what my opinions are here. So if I come into a repo and go to the settings tabs here on the far right, you'll land on this general section. And if you scroll down about 2/3 of the way down or so, I've got a few different settings. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. I've got a few different settings that I do. And this first one is kind of a, a big debate among developers of what should you do for like a merge strategy. My default is I squash merge, meaning I take all those commits and squash them down into one commit. And part of the reason why I do that is most developers, myself included, don't always have the best git hygiene when it comes to like making commits. So some people might say like oops or whoops or work in progress or whatever the case is, and they don't actually have descriptive commit messages, which is problematic for when you're trying to figure out what exactly happened. So squash merging kind of hides all that, and once you merge, it will squash your commits down into one message. And by default, I pick the pull request title because that usually has the best description of what it is that you're doing. So I don't allow merge commits, and I don't allow rebase merging. Now, if you do have good git hygiene, or your team all delegates to like agents to create your commits, then maybe you do have better commit messages. But I just like squash merging. That way it kind of works with everybody. And if I really want to go back and see like what history of how somebody got to the place that they're at, I could go look at that PR and look at those individual commits. So that's what I do. And otherwise, if you allow people to pick, you're going to end up with like non-linear history and all sorts of things like that. I also check this box of always suggest updating pull request branches. So let's say you've got two pull requests open and one merges in. Well, now your second one's out of date. So you got to like pull main, push it back up, all that fun stuff. Versus if you check this box, basically there'll be a button that shows up on your PR that says, hey, do you want to click this to update from main? And so you can just click that button and then boom, you're off to the races for like re-kicking your builds and all of that kind of stuff. So I always check that box. I also check the allow auto merge. So what that means is, let's say you opened up a PR, it's something super quick, and somebody looked at it, approved it, but now you're waiting on your build. Maybe your build takes like 5 minutes to run or whatever the case is. Well, rather than like monitoring the build and keeping track of it, you can just check this box that says allow auto merge, which basically allows you to check, click a button, and basically once all the status checks are met, so like you had, let's say you have a requirement of one person needs to review it and approve it, and then you have to pass like your build. Basically, once those status checks are satisfied, then it will auto merge. So that's super handy, as well as this checkbox that basically will auto delete any feature branches on a merge of a pull request. So after a pull request is merged, it'll automatically delete your branches. So I always check this option as well. So those are kind of my like 4 quick tip options that I pretty much do on every repo. Again, some of those are my opinions, but hopefully that makes sense why I typically do what I do. All right, let's next talk about federated credentials. So let's say you're deploying to Azure, you're going to need to authenticate from like GitHub, your GitHub Actions pipeline into Azure. So historically, how you would do this is you had a client ID, client secret, which is kind of like a username and a password in order to authenticate to Azure, because obviously you need to talk to your Azure account and it's not going to be wide open to the public. But the problem is with the client ID, client secret, you are holding on to these things, and somebody might get a hold of these credentials and be able to do what those credentials are. So the idea behind federated credentials is there is no client ID, client secret. There's only just a client ID, so no secret, and basically everything kind of happens behind the scenes and is managed by Azure and GitHub, managing those tokens. But you got to basically create an allow list on both sides to allow deployment to happen to Azure from your GitHub repo. So on the Azure side of things, this is what it looks like. Is you've got an organization. This is a recent ad in the last couple months of you have to have an org ID too. That way, in case you change your name, somebody can't take over your account. And have that allow list, because previously it was just a name. So you also need your ID. You need the repository name, the repository ID for the same reason, in case somebody that name goes away, but this allow list sticks around and they take the name or whatnot. So once you have those 4 pieces of things, those are kind of your part of what you're allowing. And then you're also saying, hey, is it coming from a GitHub environment or a GitHub branch or a pull request or a tag? In my case, I'm saying it's coming from a branch and it's the main branch. So what this allows you to do is, again, not have that client ID, client secret. And so somebody can't get at your Azure account if that gets leaked for some reason, or if somebody leaves the company but still has those credentials like in a post-it note or something. This basically has it all managed on the Azure side. So in theory, if somebody leaves your organization, they're also going to leave your GitHub organization, which means they won't have access to deploy anymore. So this is a new passwordless. It's not really super new, but it's a passwordless approach compared to the old approach from a few years ago. So if you haven't looked into federated credentials, I highly recommend looking into federated credentials. All right. Next one's very demo heavy session. We're going to talk about Ask GitHub. So if I come over here to github.com and go to like the dashboard, you'll get this, you'll kind of land here and you have this chat box. So it's like a ChatGPT like experience, but it has the context around your GitHub account. So for instance, I could say, what applications need to be updated to .NET 10, let's say, or whatever the case is. You could ask any questions. You can scope it to whatever repositories that you want, all of those kinds of things. So once you hit go, basically it's going to send you into an agent session. And rather than waiting for that, I will show you what it looks like at the end. It looked across my organization and said, hey, I've got these repos that are already on .NET 10, but this one is still on .NET 7, so I actually need to update that. Moreover, saying, hey, do you want to kick off a coding agent to do the upgrade? And I said yes, and then basically it created this pull request for me, and it went ahead and opened this PR across this open source project for me. So part of the reason why I bring the Ask GitHub up is I feel like a lot of people don't leverage this in a way that they could, and inspect their whole organization, ask questions about their whole organization, and not realize that that feature even exists, or what maybe they know it exists but don't really think about what it could be used for. So I've used this a lot to kind of get a lay of the land of different GitHub organizations and things like that that I've been a part of. So Ask GitHub is an underutilized feature in my experience. All right. Next one we're going to talk about, and the last one in the code collaboration section, is on GitHub projects. So if you come over to your user, you can go over here to projects, and then for instance, I've got this particular project already open, but I could create a new project over here. I could pick what I want. Do I want like the team planning view by default, or the Kanban view by default, whatever the case is. I can import different issues in, all of that kind of stuff. So I've already done this for my ESPN Fantasy Football Analyzer app that I have. And you can see here I've got like this backlog view, so I can move things over into different statuses that I want. I can also like roadmap this out. And so I can like kind of lay out, hey, here's when we think this is going to be done, and those kinds of things. Say like, hey, I'm going to plan to do this, around this date, all of those sorts of things. So I can start road mapping that stuff out. I can look at this in a few different ways and start grouping things. Maybe this is my backlog, but maybe I want this in different sprints and all of those kinds of things. So I find a lot of people don't realize that GitHub has this project view. They're just used to managing like issues kind of at a glance. So just wanted to call out GitHub projects is also something you may not have seen GitHub have the capability of doing before. All right, those are kind of my like quick collaboration tips that you may not have seen before. So next one we're going to talk about, the next section we're going to talk about is GitHub Actions and agents tips that you might not know about. So for instance, GitHub Actions, so if you haven't seen GitHub Actions too much, basically it's a way to run tasks based on a trigger. So commonly it's used for CI/CD pipelines to automate the build and deploys of your applications. However, a lot of people don't know that you can actually set up a scheduled jobs and a cron schedule in GitHub Actions. So instead of saying on pull request, like you might be used to in your traditional GitHub action, you can just say on schedule and set a cron expression here, which this apparently means runs every hour. And of course, I totally knew that off the top of my head, just like I know what regex is off the top of my head. But this is an example of, hey, you can actually run scheduled jobs within GitHub Actions. Now, this might not be like used for like an enterprise scheduler of like, hey, let's say you've got 10,000 jobs in your enterprise and you want to kick them off with GitHub Actions, but this can be useful for lots of different things like security scans for scanning like, are there new introduced package issues or something like that, or maybe you just got a script you want to run one off, whatever the case is. There's lots of different scenarios where scheduled jobs can come in and be handy. Another thing I see people not use as much as they probably should is using reusable workflows. So let's say you are a company that has a mix of like .NET, JavaScript, Python, those kinds of technologies. You can actually standardize on, hey, here's how we build and deploy .NET or Python or JavaScript or whatever it is at this company, and here's how we deploy it to Azure or wherever you're deploying it to. So what that kind of looks like is in the reusable workflow, so the thing that it's kind of capturing how you build and deploy those types of applications. You set up this trigger called on workflow call, and then you can provide any inputs or secrets as well that customizes things, because maybe this is like a deployment workflow and you're saying, hey, when I deploy it, I want to deploy to like dev and test and prod, and maybe you've got different things that you do there and different names and where it goes and all that fun stuff. You can customize what happens via inputs and secrets. And so I'm saying, hey, I'm going to take one in for environment and it's required and it's of type string. And then on the consuming side, so in the application repo level, I can reference this by referencing the org. So in this case, I'm just saying my org, but whatever your GitHub org is, the repo name, I just call this shared workflows, but it could be anything, the path to the file that I'm reusing. And then I can use the branch name here, or from a security perspective, it's safest to do like the commit SHA, so you know exactly what commit SHA it was doing. But that's a broader conversation outside the scope of today. But that kind of shows you how you can reuse some of those things. And then I can customize these inputs by saying with environment dev or test or QA or UAT or prod, whatever the case is. So that kind of gives you an example of how you can create these reusable workflows and then how you can reference them as well. All right, another feature people overlook in GitHub Actions is path filters. So the idea behind this is, hey, I only want to run this workflow if these paths change. So for instance, let's say I've got some Terraform infrastructure as code stuff. Well, I only want to run this particular workflow if the Terraform folder changed or whatever the case is. You can also do the opposite and say, hey, don't run this workflow if a markdown file just changed, because maybe, like, for instance, maybe I'll just scope that to README in general. Like, hey, if the README changed, you don't need to rebuild the entire application and redeploy it because I was just updating some documentation, but you can have this do kind of whatever it is that you want. So you can kind of opt in to only run this workflow when these files change, or opt out, like don't run this unless if these files changed. All right. So next thing I'm going to show is optimizing Copilot to optimize your workflows. So for instance, I can throw Copilot, and again, I could run this locally too, but I'm just doing this in the github.com UI. But I can just start an agent session and tell Copilot, hey, optimize, and just say like optimize the CI/CD workflows in this repo. Something like that, kick that off, similar thing that happens. Again, we're not going to wait for it just to move on. But this is kind of what it came back with after it did that. Like, it looked at it and said, hey, your pipeline is actually doing a double build, so you probably shouldn't do that. As well as you're not doing any package caching. You should probably do that. And it gave a bunch of different tips and tricks on how to optimize my CI/CD workflow, because more and more with agents, as we're getting faster developing code and things like that, the pipeline run speed is now starting to become the bottleneck. So how do you optimize that? Well, one way is you just throw Copilot at it and have Copilot tell you what's wrong. So that's definitely something that I've seen people can leverage as well. All right, and the last one I'm going to talk about is something called GitHub Agentic Workflows, which is a relatively new thing. So I'm curious how many people out there have fully up-to-date docs that they feel confident are not out of date. Probably almost nobody, right? Well, this is where GitHub Agentic Workflows can come in. So let's go ahead and look at an example of that. So with GitHub Agentic Workflows, they're very similar to GitHub Action. I'll show kind of behind the scenes what this looks like too. But basically what I have this set up on this particular repo is anytime a GitHub Action runs, I'm using GitHub Agentic Workflows to comment and say, hey, go check my agentsmd file. Is it up to date? Check my README, check the docs folder, all those kinds of things. And against this PR to see if anything needs updated. So in this particular case, it's saying, hey, the agentsmd is stale, so you really should make this change instead. And after I made the change, then it found another drift based on the changes that I made. So then, I kind of went back and forth, and eventually it said, hey, everything is current with your particular documentation. So I have this running on any push to a pull request, and so that way you can't get past this unless it passes to make sure that our documentation is always up to date. But obviously, you could do this for anything. So you could do different scenarios for when you need some agentic look at a particular workflow, because previously, pre-AI, trying to make sure that your documentation was up to date was pretty difficult unless you auto-generated all of your documentation, but that's usually not the case. Like readmes are usually not completely auto-generated. So anytime you need some of that judgment call, that's where you can throw in AI into things. In this case, making sure that your readmes and your different documentation pieces in your repo are up to date. So what that kind of looks like behind the scenes, it's just a markdown file, but you can give it a description, even an emoji, and you can see, where some of that pulls in. But then you say, hey, on pull request, which looks very similar to our GitHub Actions. You can give it different permissions. In my case, I'm running off the Copilot engine, but you can customize your engine as well. And then you give it different tools that it can do for this particular action. So you can limit down what scope somebody has. And then basically at the end of the day, it's just what a lot of AI Markdown looks like. Just, hey, here's what you're doing. Here's what I want you to check. Here's the different files I'm interested in having you check. All of those kinds of things. So again, you can do lots of different things with GitHub Agentic Workflows, but hopefully that gives you an idea of something that you can do with them, as well as the fact just giving visibility to that they exist in general, because it's relatively new to GitHub. So that's what I have for you today. Hopefully you got at least one thing you learned about GitHub today that you can take and apply immediately back at work. If you're interested in adding me on LinkedIn, I got a QR code there, or if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Otherwise, thanks everybody.